I recently had an experience which shook my confidence that I understand the books that I'm reading. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video which I'm just going to kind of ramble about some thoughts I had about reading. And this all came about because I listened to a podcast in which Rachel Kushner talked about her book Creation Lake. Now, I read and reviewed Creation Lake relatively recently, and I liked the book. I thought it was good. And I kind of interpreted it as kind of a look at kind of a young person trying to find meaning, a person whose life seemed empty and meaningless. They literally had no identity. They had nothing they believed in. Finding something to believe in and kind of that changing their approach to life, or maybe causing them to reassess their approach to life. And that's kind of what I thought the book was about. That's what I said. I think that's what I said the book was about. But when I listened to Rachel Kushner on this podcast, she was talking about things that I had not associated or thought about in relation to this book at all. And so it made me wonder, do I really understand what I'm reading? Am I reading these books wrong? Am I not smart enough to get out of the books what the author intended? And then, the obvious question which comes up for many people here on BookTube, and was talked about quite frequently, is does it matter if I get what the author intended? So I will say that I am one of those people who wants to know what the author wanted me to know. I want to know what the author intended. I can still, I think, read the book and maybe get something different out of that. To a large extent, this is kind of, I think, one of the reasons why I read a book before I do, any research or listen to anything about what the author has to say about it, is so I get my own experience of the book, my own ideas about what I think the book is about, and then from there I listen to what the author says. And, generally speaking, I would say most of the time I'm pretty much in the ballpark, and it's just kind of with this Kushner book that I thought I wasn't. So this got me thinking about, my responsibility as a reader, and I know, even talking about reading, readers having responsibility is going to kind of bother some people, but then also kind of the responsibility of an author. So I think an author has a responsibility to their readers to communicate whatever it is they want the book to communicate in a clear enough way that, a reader reading it picks up on it. Whether, it's an overt thing that is clear that you pick up on. For instance, I don't think there's very much subtlety in Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead about what the message is there in terms of the way in which we treat rural communities and what's happened with opioid epidemics there. I think that's, fairly sledgehammer over the head. But with Kushner's book, apparently it was a lot more subtle. And so, part of me wants to put the responsibility on her. You didn't communicate perhaps the ideas that you said you wanted the book to cover well enough for me to pick up on them. In part, I do believe that's true. And this is kind of one of the reasons I think why increasingly I find that I'm not attracted to books that I'm just going to talk about being intentionally difficult. My tolerance for books which are intentionally difficult to read and understand and get the point of is diminishing. That doesn't mean I don't want to read books that people label as difficult. It just means I want those books to, not be so obscure that I can't possibly pick up on it. So, there are all kinds of books out there like this. This is kind of one of the reasons why I'm not so sure I'm interested in reading the works of William Gaddis, like J.R. and things like that anymore, because A, they're long, and B, they seem to be intentionally difficult and maybe obscure. But I do still occasionally read books like that, and as a challenge to myself. But to a certain extent, I think those books are kind of intentionally, to a certain extent, trying to appeal to only the people who are going to get it. It's something about that bothers me. There's something in me that says storytelling should be something that resonates and appeals to everyone. And I'm not saying that Kushner didn't do that. I'm saying, that Kushner wrote an intentionally obscure and difficult book. She didn't. So to bring back the focus is, did I get out of the book what she intended? And this oftentimes then brings up the issue of death of the author. Now, a lot of times when people say death of the author, what they mean is that, what an author is as a person shouldn't affect how we read their books. And that's not really the original intention of that phrase. death of the author. The phrase meant that we should just ignore whatever the author's intent was and experience the book as a reader completely on our own and not worry about what the author's intent was. And I would love to be able to embrace that idea, but there's something in me, I don't know, inferiority complex. It feels like I have to know. I feel like I have to know what the author really intended. So then that I can't really evaluate the book unless I know how well the author communicated the thing they intended to communicate. And so, you know, that the whole death of the author thing is something that I struggle with, but it doesn't mean I don't, I think, interpret books differently than other people do. I'm not necessarily worried about what, you know, other people, how other people interpret books. You know, I made a whole video about are we reading James wrong, in which I essentially asserted the idea that James isn't really a retelling of Huckleberry Finn so much as using Huckleberry Finn as a launch point to kind of talk about the issues of race in the United States of America throughout our history, from slavery to, at the least, integration in the 1960s. That's really what's being discussed there. And, you know, I like coming up with theories like that. And the great thing about being a Percival Everett fan is he doesn't really tell you what he intends anyway, so you can kind of make it up as you go along. But that whole death of the author thing is a struggle for me, because I think part of evaluating a book for me is understanding what the author intended so I can evaluate how well they communicated that. So, you know, this kind of then led me to question, have I been reading all these books that I read and review wrong? And maybe I've started thinking about it this way because I've been reading a lot more nonfiction this year, which is usually pretty clear in what the intention is. If you can't find what the intention is from reading, it's usually somewhere in the introduction. And maybe that's what's caused me to do this. But I just was kind of wondering if any of you had these same thoughts. You ever heard an author speak about a book and then thought, wow, I didn't get any of that from the book, or that's something completely different from the book? And, you know, do you care? You know, I'm not necessarily looking for you to reassure me that it's okay and that I'm not reading wrong and that, you know, I'm good enough to read these books. I'm really interested in kind of more, I guess, commiseration. Or do others feel this way? Do others feel like they miss the point of books, and then question whether or not that should matter? That's kind of what I'm after here in this, now I realize, incredibly self-indulgent and pointless ramble, which, you know, I'll probably go ahead and post anyway. Anyway, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.